Simone. Today we are going to be talking about the immorality of weakness. And I would note here that we are not going to be talking about this from the perspective of Nietzsche, but we will be talking a lot about Friedrich Nietzsche throughout, especially at the end of this episode, to differentiate our views on why weakness should be scorned versus Nietzsche's views on weakness leading fundamentally to immorality. Because they're actually distinct, but not as distinct as I thought when I went into this subject. And I would say that me studying Nietzsche, very sad. It's just a bunch of instances of me being like, I don't want to be basic, but he actually makes a lot of good points. Very prescient about woke people, but we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
That people will use the sympathy of others to try to exert power over them, and that people will manipulate others by acting sympathetic to them to keep them in a permanently infantilized state that glorifies themselves, i.e. the person doing the infantilization. But before we get to all of that, where this was highlighted for me was two things. One is a recent evolution in my understanding of our wider world perspective, which has become a lot more clear to me in sort of how I view clan-based structures and how I view morality at the wider societal level than at the individual level, but also a clip that we ran in a recent episode. That's a famous scene from Trigun, or I don't know if it's a famous scene, but it's a scene that always hit me hard as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Because in it, there are two characters arguing, and the character who is the villain says, you have to kill, the one character is trying to save a butterfly, the good guy. And then the villain says, well, you just need to kill the spider then, basically.
Because it's a butterfly caught in a web, for those only listening.
Because if you free the butterfly, then the spider will eventually starve. You're not doing a good thing by freeing the butterfly. You're just consigning the spider to a slow death. And the good guy character says, no, there's always a way.
That was the easiest way to stop him.
I didn't want to kill the spider.
Unless the spider caught the butterfly, it would die of starvation. You can't save both.
It's not right to make that choice so easily. So you should...
But I'm not wrong about this, Rem. Wanting to save both is just a naive contradiction. And what would you have rather had us do? Just think about it? In the meantime, while we do that, the spider eats the butterfly.
I wanted to save both of them, you idiot!
And the entire Trigun series is based around this philosophy of no matter how bad things are, there is always a way to save the bad guy. There is always a way to make things right. When in reality, by attempting to save the bad guy, you often cause much more harm in the long term. You are masturbating your own sense of justice, like you being a good person, usually because you don't have to deal with the risk that that bad guy poses to society. The famous example here, of course, I'm thinking of is the woman who had a person murder her mother. And everyone was like, this is a really bad dude. She petitioned to get them released from prison early, hired them, and then they murdered her when she fired them for stealing from her. Which is to say that a lot of people, when they take this benevolent and magnanimous looking position, they're doing it just to heighten their own sense of I'm a good person without really thinking about the other harm that this person is going to cause, which is what often happens if you look at statistics, and I'll add some in post here. The vast majority, for example, of thefts are caused by a very, very small majority of thieves who just do it over and over and over again. It's the same with killers. It's the same with just about any crime. Very small number of people actually do it.
Which I think also, just to be fair, explains the behavior of people who want to give people the benefit of the doubt, because the vast majority of humans deserve the benefit of the doubt. It's a very, very small percentage that really just needs to be distrusted and removed from mainstream society.
But the problem here is I think that we as a society have been conditioned to not believe this by media. And I'm going to call this the Taihat Maru problem.
What's on your mind, Lieutenant?
The Kobayashi Maru, sir.
Lieutenant, you are looking at the only Starfleet cadet who ever beat the no-win scenario.
How?
I reprogrammed the simulation so it was possible to rescue the ship.
What?
He cheated.
I changed the conditions of the test. I don't believe in the no-win scenario.
Now, For people who don't know what the Tai-Hop Maru is, the Tai-Hop Maru is a famous test from the Star Trek universe that you are supposed to be unable to pass. And it's supposed to show what do you do in an unwinnable scenario. And yet our society and media constantly says when the hero is given an unwinnable scenario, save this person or this person, save your love or like this group of citizens, the answer is always supposed to be there is a way to save both. And that is not true fundamentally.
Right.
There is not always a way to solve both. And it creates a really toxic mindset around morality for a lot of people because they believe that any decision that leads to harm for some group of people is fundamentally an immoral decision, regardless of the necessity or long-term good of that decision. And so here, what I wanted to dig into was your response to the Trigun video, because I think it's accurate and it encapsulates our view of morality that we will go into and why this view of morality leads downstream to some very perplexing beliefs that we have. For example, a lot of people can be like, wait, you guys think that there's differences between cultural groups. So if you think that there's differences between cultural like groups, then why don't you think that like the Europeans are the good guys and like the Jews and like the blacks are the bad guys? When it seems that you actually have a great deal of derision for Northern Europeans and even more derision for anti-Semites. And yet you hold pretty neutral views to groups like the Hispanics, and really, really confuses. And it's like, well, there's actually a logically consistent reason for all of these beliefs, but you just assume that the reason is that we're capitulating to the urban monoculture without realizing that the position that we're taking is actually even harder to hold than the just generic sort of racist person position, because we don't have some big community that's going to back us up for it. It is more based than this other position because it is more unique and out there. But Simone, go through what your thoughts were to the spider in the web.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an obvious correct answer for the spider in the web, which is you leave them alone. And if the butterfly is a strong and resilient butterfly, it will get out of the web. If it is a smart and resourceful and healthy spider, it will eat the butterfly. And you don't want to release the butterfly as if it's a weak butterfly and it continues to reproduce and produce other hapless butterflies. It will hurt all butterfly kind. Ditto with the spider. So you just kind of have to let them duke it out, and you shouldn't be intervening, and nature will run its course, which I guess makes us bad people, but it's very consistent with our Calvinist inspired views, right? Of like, it is not our job to intervene. You are saved or you're not saved. You are fit or you're not. You're going to matter or you're not. You're going to change history or you're not. And that is not within our control. We have free will 100%, but we've been dealt the cards we've been dealt. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I would say that while you can talk about this at the level of the spider and the butterfly, where this matters more when we're making cultural decisions about the cultural groups we admire and that we look to, and we tell our kids, these are good cultural groups. These are cultural groups you should model yourselves after. These are cultural groups you can learn from. Are the cultural groups that are thriving and in an upwards trajectory. So I'll note here, when I say in an upwards trajectory, the unique amount of derision we have towards things like European cultural groups or Americans who are born into positions of relative privilege but haven't been able to secure a family is downstream of the belief that they should have had access to all sorts of advantages, and yet they are still failing. Why are they failing despite their historic position of strengths? That must mean that their culture is uniquely ill-fitted to our time and place. Essentially, and people get very surprised. They're like, but I thought you guys care about diversity. And this is where you need to understand the way we relate to diversity. So if we care about cultural diversity, we see every individual culture as a hypothesis about how people might live and thrive and get through the current challenges, both technological and social, that our species is facing.
Right.
And if every culture is a hypothesis, a culture that is failing to thrive under these conditions is fundamentally an incorrect hypothesis. I do not care about incorrect hypotheses thriving. I care about the greatest diversity of correct hypotheses thriving, because the greater diversity of correct hypotheses we have, the less of a monoculture we will have, and the more resistance we will have to unknown threats. Humanity, the species, will have to threats that may occur in the future.
So in other words, we're looking at cultures and cultural technology that produces human flourishing. And if it fails to do that, then we don't see the point in trying to intervene and save it, because in the end, it is producing suffering, it is producing harm, it is producing death, and it's causing damage, and it's holding humanity back.
Well, yes, and this happens at two levels, and there's two reasons to have this derision. One is for yourself and for your own culture and family. So if I looked with admiration, for example, we were doing the episode on modern German culture recently that we were pointing out is really, really failing right now. If I looked with admiration at the culture in Germany right now, and I told my kids, oh, you should admire that, you should follow that, they would end up weaker because that culture is failing. I need to teach them to see that culture with a degree of disgust. And if they can do that, then they are less likely to follow a culture that isn't thriving or pick up bad ideas. But if they see a group that is doing well, a high fertility, economically thriving cultural group, they should look at that group and be like, oh, for whatever reason in our current cultural context, this group is doing really well. What can I steal from them? It reminds me of the clan people, as I've mentioned, who go into the backwoods, which can help people understand pluralism as a cultural value system, which is to say that when the backwoods cultural group, the Greater Appalachian group in America, when they immigrated into this country and they encountered the Native Americans, they butchered lots of Native Americans when contrasted with the Puritans or the Quakers or the other cultural groups in the region. But they also didn't dehumanize the Native Americans. They married into Native American families at very, very high rates. They adopted tons of Native American cultural technologies. They basically saw the Native Americans as just another group in this inter-clan competition. You know, if you have the Hatfields and the McCoys, the Native Americans are just another group that we should try to take their stuff and learn what they're doing that's working and learn what they're doing that's not working. Now, I'm not saying that should work, that's like a good way to do things, or that's the way things should work in a modern context. And I'll discuss why this is uniquely bad in a second. But I'm saying that it epitomizes this view of diversity, which is to say that when you see another group not doing well, you're like, okay, I'm going to take their stuff. But like I will outcompete them. Good. But when you see another group that is doing well in some way, you're like, okay, what can I learn from them? Everyone is equally human to you, and everyone is part of this game to you. Whereas to groups like the Quakers, the Native Americans weren't really human. They were like the child or something that needed to be protected and kept in a zoo. But like there was obviously nothing to learn from them. There was obviously nothing, no reason to respect them or marry into their families or et cetera, right? And this is also a very interesting thing, which is why people who have this pluralistic cultural competition mindset end up being much more from stronger cultures because they believe they have to be a strong culture. It is a position of internal cultural weakness that leads to an individual shying away from this world perspective, because it means that when you look at other groups, you think if they could intermingle with my group, or if we were competing within a fair, equal environment, I would be outcompeted. When you are certain that you will outcompete others, you always want equality. Strong groups always fight for equality, while groups that have an internal weakness, a fear of being diluted, a fear of being outcompeted, they will always compete for isolation.
And either you will think, if you're in one of these groups that you're really confident about, that your group will just take over all the other groups and make the world better, or that in the end, only the strong groups will remain and the world will be better. But either perspective has an adherent believing that the world will be better off, especially if the weaker groups are allowed to run their course and stop existing.
Yes, and an interesting thing about this philosophy, and this is where actually something that Nietzsche talks about aligns with something that we believe, which is he argues that being sympathetic to someone who is suffering, or I don't believe he uses the word sympathy. What's the word he uses here? Showing pity to somebody who is suffering is fundamentally to infantilize them and to prevent them from rising up. But this doesn't mean never help people who are suffering. Help them with magnanimity. And when you help another culture with magnanimity, you are helping them with the intention of creating a group that competes against your own, and through that competition makes you sharper.
I like that. And I think the point isn't to say into the garbage like can these guys go, or like maybe it would be better if we just accelerate their demise. No, it's give them tools to maybe have them change, because as they are now isn't clearly sustainable, and help them, give them an out, maybe offer them the chance to join your group.
It's important to note that one of these tools needs to be derision and looking down on them. Because if you accept another group for their failure, as the progressives do, handing out fentanyl,
that infantilizes them and it insults them.
It doesn't just insult them, it traps them, because it puts them at a local optimum where it is better for them to continue with their state of non-contribution over exploring what potential other pathways might be available to them.
Well, and another avenue, or I guess arena or part of our lives in which we see this, is that classic issue with teachers, where as a student, sometimes it'd be really annoying if a teacher was really critical of you, or would like put a lot of time into showing you what an idiot you are with your work, or how much you could improve your form on something like in martial arts or in a sport. And you would complain to a parent and say like, oh, why are they being so mean? Like, can't I just play? And your parent would explain to you that teacher actually cares about you. Like, they don't give a shit about anyone else in the class. They're just letting everyone else skate by and basically be mediocre, but they're investing in you because you have potential. And I think that's the same kind of dynamic here. Are you going to just let them slide by and feel bad for the fact that they're mediocre and bad and not encourage them to improve? Or are you going to recognize the potential they have to flourish and invest in it?
Well, and I think that this can be seen in the way that we approach things like philanthropy. You can look at the Collins Institute, which is a institution that is designed to teach people and be free, and as an education source that we built for our own kids' education primarily, but we made it free to anyone else who wants to use it, to put all of human knowledge at their fingertips. And that this is fundamentally opposed to many of the progressive solutions to things like poverty, which is to say, oh, well, we'll give them money. Oh, well, we'll give them houses. Oh, well, we'll give them this and this and this, which is a form of enablement. But it also makes the progressive dominated areas worse, because they end up attracting more of these economically unproductive individuals. And so people can look, like when a progressive looks at what we're offering, they're like, well, yeah, but the homeless people may not want to use your education system. They may not want to attempt to educate themselves. And it's like, well, that's a problem then, isn't it? And then they're like, well, what if they have like severe mental illnesses and stuff like that? What if they've got all of these other, problems? And it's like, well, this is the thing. I believe that everyone is capable of economically contributing in this country, unlike you, progressive. I think that when you lower the amount of restrictions that people have on them, there is always a way to make a living. I believe that everyone has some utility to society, which is fundamentally different than the view that you are espousing, which is that these individuals must be permanently infantilized. And I believe that there is a class that is born with that level of mental disability, but I think it's a much smaller class than is functionally left disabled by the way progressives handle things like homelessness.
That and improvement requires tough love. Improvement requires being critical. It's something also that shows up a lot in your and my relationship, right? People think, oh, can you believe that they would criticize each other or encourage each other to be better? Or for me to be like, hey, Malcolm, you could do this better. Or you'd be like, Simone, like, this is a great meal, but it needs more of this or that. And by the way, you're totally right. That rice needed way more salt, or like MSG, it just needed a kick. But like the fact that we do that, it's because we care, and it's because we love each other, and it's because we respect each other. And we live in a culture now that sees criticism as an act of violence rather than an act of care. And I think it's that contextualization that needs a complete rebrand now and a complete overhaul, because we have to return to an age in which giving someone criticism, giving someone room for improvement is an act of, and it's seen as an act of care and love. We can get there, And I think people are ready for that. But I think it's going to take a lot of work because we've been so indoctrinated, even from your and my childhood, of thinking that critical feedback is violence, technically speaking.
Well, yeah, and so people will hear this philosophy and they'll think, oh, well, this means you think the strong should lord over the weak, that the strong should push around the weak. When instead we're saying the exact opposite. Anybody who knows us knows that we have a very high opinion of ourselves and our family culture, which I think all cultures should. If you don't have pride in who you are, then why are you existing? Why are you doing any of this? Why are you passing on your culture to the next generation? We have an incredibly high degree of pride in who we are, and yet we focus our efforts on trying to help other cultures and communities that are struggling right now and making it through something like demographic collapse, even cultures that are very different from our own. And we want that because we want our kids to have a diverse group of competitors to further hone themselves. If humanity becomes homogenous, humanity has fundamentally failed because we are no longer intergenerationally improving. We are just a blob, the same thing forever.
So cast off your fears of age and blight. In putrescence find your true delight. For in my realm all I cherish so, let my blessings upon you grow. Embrace the rot, let pestilence bloom. In putrefaction find joy, not doom. My garden grows with every spore. Nurgle's love will rot you to the core.
Because we are no longer intergenerationally improving. We are just a blob, the same thing forever. And I think that this leads to conflict between us. Like, some people are like, why are you so antagonistic to cultures that attempt to enforce their values on other cultures? So for example, cultures that try to enforce, anti-gay marriage, all society shouldn't have gay marriage. And I'm like, no, the cultures that are against gay marriage can do better. They should do better, but you can't enforce this on other people. Like, Sharia law is bad, right? And they're like, no, I think that my culture needs to be enforced on everyone. And then people who have this perspective, you often see a high overlap with this and things like anti-Semitism and stuff like that. And I think that there's this influencer class who, I'll move away from naming them specifically, but who have an overlapping fan base with our own, who have a confluence of these sorts of perspectives. And people are surprised by the amount of intense derision we have towards these individuals. And I think that they think that this derision that we have towards these individuals is a capitulation to the urban monoculture, instead of literally for the exact same reason we have derision for the urban monoculture. And perhaps even in greater measure, because when I look at the type of person who might be saved, who might be able to build a strong culture themselves, who might be able to build some sort of level of intergenerational thrivingness, these types of individuals are drawn to right-leaning philosophies like ours, but they can also be lured by the siren calls of these other philosophers, which wear the aesthetics of the right-leaning community. And people can be like, what do you mean? Like be specific here. And I'm like, well, I see no different from your standard anti-Semite than I see your average BLM protester. These are both individuals who are from one cultural group, whether it's like a Black cultural group or whether it's from a white supremacist cultural group, who sees another culture outcompeting them, whether it's academically or in the number of famous people they have or in the number of politicians they have or in the number, because Jews do very well in those categories, or in their economic success, and they basically get angry and flip over the board like a child and are like, you must be cheating. Instead of being willing to see any flaw in themselves. And these individuals are worthy of the highest level of scorn, much higher than just a culture that's failing, because they're not just a culture that's failing, they're a culture that is incapable of improving itself because it is incapable of seeing its own flaws or when other people are out competing it. Which means that when I'm, interacting with my kid and I want to ensure really, really, really stay away from values like this or people like this, that's what we're looking at. And the highest degree of toxicity in this comes from when we look at how to better our culture. And I think that these two cultural groups can really be seen here, how they differ. Both groups might believe the goal is cultural supremacy through individual competition, which is a little different. But when we're improving our culture, or I guess I should say, both of these groups see their goal as cultural improvement. But when we're looking at cultural improvement, we are looking at other cultures and trying to see how they're doing well, or hypothesize ways we can do our own culture better, while looking to our culture's history to see what parts of it worked in the past.
Well, and
When they're looking to improve their future, they're looking to purify their culture by going back to some sort of cargo cult aesthetic of an imagined past greatness, which existed for almost no culture on Earth.
Yes, and we need to see a return to friendly rivalry and a good form, which I don't know. Reading J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan introduced me to the concept of good form in a way that I just really loved, because it gave me a peek into how people used to view healthy rivalry in the past, which is, and then maybe I'm totally romanticizing this and misremembering it, but the idea is that you would compete with someone and you would compete along, I guess, certain rules of like basically being a good sport or a bad sport. And a rival was seen as a good thing that you wanted in your life. It was like a knife enjoys seeing something it can sharpen itself on it, and it knows that it needs it. And right now, when people see groups that are in competition or even opposition that hold different values, they see them as a threat that has to be eliminated. They see them as a thing that they should take out in using any means available, including very bad form. Whereas in the past, I really loved this concept of seeing opponents in life, seeing rivals as a source of improving your own fitness. And when you lost, you would lose in good humor, understanding that you've learned something from it and that you will become stronger through the act of losing, figuring out what you did wrong, and then getting excited about having another round with this opposing entity or person and hopefully winning next time. But you can't get there if you don't engage and if you don't take everything with good humor, good sportsmanship, and good form.
Exactly. Well, and this is where I get so high in my derision of these groups, is they haven't the capacity to improve anymore because of that. Because they see a group beating them as a group victimizing them. They are unable to believe, because of this usually a lionization of a fictional historic past greatness, that their culture could lose in a fair competition. And so they'll say, well, then the competition wasn't fair. And this matters to us because as soon as people realize that cultures are actually different and groups are actually different, they then want to say, well, mine's good. But if you say yours is good, not because of you, not because of your individual efforts to improve that culture, but because historically it has some claim to supremacy, it will inevitably fail and is also uniquely tempting and dangerous to individuals who are close to the path of, I think, cultural actualization. Which is, again, why we constantly deride these groups so much. And here I really want to highlight something that is often missed by people. But Nazis really were just the we was kings for white Germanic people. If people aren't familiar with the we was kings meme, it is this joke around some people in modern Black culture that will try to take credit for all of these historic moments or characters in history, saying, oh, ancient Greeks, that was all Black people, or, oh, the first battery, or the first, they think Wakanda is real, basically.
The original rulers of England and Britain were Black.
That's King George of England, a light-skinned Black man.
You clearly see the Vikings as Black men. Do you see that with your glasses? These are Black men. Jesus is a Black man.
Beethoven.
Black.
Mozart.
Black.
Henry VIII.
Black.
William Shakespeare.
Undoubtedly Black.
We was kings and shit, that's the truth we spit. Genghis Khan, Alexander too. Black as fuck, yeah, they knew what's true. Caesar, Napoleon, all them cats. Black power, homie, we created that. We started China, Japan, and Rome. India too, man, we claimed every throne. Built the Great Wall, Taj Mahal, no cap. Babylon's gardens, yeah, we did all that. We brought democracy, math, and science. Set the standards, made the world reliant. We was kings, and that's no lie. Yasuke, the greatest samurai ever known. His legend grew, as Black as our own. Aristotle, Socrates, yeah, they was Black. Plato too, that's a straight up fact.
And we laugh at them and are like, oh, that's so silly. But that's exactly who both the Nazis were in a historic context, but also a lot of the modern neo-Nazi movement falls into this category. In that, the Nazis would say, oh, well, Buddha, he was actually Aryan. He wasn't Indian, of course. Or you'll get, not even exaggerating here, I have seen this in our own comment section when we're talking about, oh, the ancient Greeks did stuff. It wasn't the ancient Celts, it wasn't the ancient Northern Europeans, it wasn't the ancient Germans. And they're like, oh, don't you know, just like in the Kang's stereotype, don't you know that like Socrates and Alexander and all that, they were actually Northern European guys, and all of the ancient Greeks, they actually used to be Northern Europeans? And it's like, oh my God, you sound exactly like a Kang's guy.
Aristotle, Socrates, yeah, they was black. Plato too, that's a straight up fact.
And they would talk about how great like German and Aryan civilization was. When anyone who studied Roman history knows that they were, of the barbarians, one of the most barbaric, along with my own ancestors in Britain. These people were basically animals when the Romans were building all of their great stuff, when the ancient Greeks were building all of their great stuff. And so I view both movements and individuals with equal derision. In the same breath here, if the progressive movement's goal is to force everyone into the urban monoculture, you have a number of ideological arguments against that, like the clan-based argument that we're presenting here. But in addition to these ideological arguments, there is aesthetic conservatives. So in the same way that, some progressives like to dress up like furries, and furries broadly are a progressive movement, in the conservative movement, we have these people who like to LARP in sort of this cargo cult of the 1950s trad family that they, got from Hollywood, not taking into account that if they saw something come out of Hollywood today, they'd be like, well, that's obvious propaganda and not real. And I'd be like, yeah, and what was happening in the 1950s was Hollywood propaganda heavily influenced by the Legion of Decency. And it's okay to have them in the movement. Like we have many of the same goals, but them attempting to impose this LARP that they're playing on other people hurts us in election cycles and is the conservative version and should be treated, I think, with equal derision to when progressives do this of, the trans community trying to legally force people to use their pronouns. If they can gain status within their own little local hierarchies for playing that LARP, fine. If they can gain status by signaling that they want to impose that LARP on other people, fine. But they need to learn that when they're hurting us in election cycles for something that is obviously has no sort of philosophical backbone to it other than an aesthetic, that's where we need to draw the line, and there needs to be some degree of pushback. But now I want to go into Nietzsche, because a lot of people will hear this and see rhyming parts. Have you ever studied Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy?
Nietzsche? No.
What do you know about it broadly before I go into it?
What do I know about his philosophy?
Yeah.
There's the Ubermensch. There's a fairly black-pilled approach to humanity and society. And there's a deeply unhappy man who people have misframed as an incel just because he never married, but it's not like he was actually an incel, who was generally fairly unhealthy and didn't have very great relationships in his life, but had really great ideas and left behind that legacy that has since mostly resonated with young men. How accurate am I here?
You end up agreeing with him a lot.
No, we would totally end up agreeing with him a lot because we take a very...
Okay, well, here, I'll ask you a different question. What do you think his view on the Ubermensch was? What is your vague understanding of the Ubermensch?
If I were to frame it in our terms or state it in our terms, it would be that some people really matter and the rest of people just don't. No, that's not it? Okay, what is...
He believes the Ubermensch is someone who creates their own values and meaning in life rather than accepting pre-existing moral frameworks.
Oh, wow. So we totally like that because that's basically what the Pragmatist Guide to Life is all about, is decide for yourself what you believe and why.
So this individual affirms life completely, saying yes to all aspects of existence, including both joy and suffering. He believes that this individual has overcome and have self-mastery. A fundamental aspect of the Ubermensch is the ability to overcome oneself continually. This involves mastering one's own instincts, passions, and even one's quote-unquote evil tendencies. The Ubermensch strives for constant self-improvement and self-overcoming. This worldliness, he positions as the Ubermensch as a counterpoint to other worldly religious ideals. The Ubermensch is focused on giving meaning meaning to life on Earth rather than seeking fulfillment in a spiritual or afterlife realm. Creative power. The Ubermensch is described as a quote-unquote poet of life, someone who creates and destroys in the process of self-realization. This creative power extends to the formation of new values and the ability to shape one's own identity. Independence and responsibility. An Ubermensch takes full responsibility for their life and choices, not relying on external authority or scapegoats. They are capable of standing alone and embracing the freedom and responsibility that comes with self-determination. Embracing life's challenges. Rather than seeking comfort or easy solutions, the Ubermensch welcomes challenges, conflicts, and adversity as opportunities for growth and self-realization.
So the Ubermensch is just a reasonable, logical person who takes ownership of what they believe?
I'm getting to the end here. Transcendence of common morality. The Ubermensch goes beyond conventional morality, recognizing its socially constructed nature. However, this does not mean being amoral, but rather creating a personal ethical framework based on life-affirming values. In essence, Nietzsche's Übermensch represents the highest potential of human beings, someone who has overcome societal constraints, created their own values, and fully embraced the challenges and joys of earthly existence. It's important to note that Nietzsche saw this as an ideal to strive towards, not necessarily a concrete reality or call for a superior race. So, continue. Your thoughts.
So this sounds like someone who just owns their own morality and lives life according to it, in accordance with the values that they have decided independently for themselves without being told what to do by society matter. And that there's nothing exceptional about this kind of person, aside from the fact that it is fairly exceptional for someone
he
to
thinks
deviate
it's
from
exceptional. He didn't think
society.
it existed yet.
Wasn't he one of those people?
No.
So what no, because he doesn't seem to be the kind of person who went by
believed that
society's
his
values.
were influenced by the values of society, and that other people's values were influenced by the values of society, and that these were not truly independently crafted values.
Okay. Well,
So-
he was probably being a little hard on himself, but
I don't know, Simone. I'd ask you this. Other than us, how many people do you know who created their own values, a la like we go through in the Pragmatist Guide to Life? How many have actually followed through with that?
I think, someone
many?
obviously, because we spoke with him recently. Give me a moment here. Monarchist.
Curtis Yarvin.
Yeah, I think that, what is his name again?
Curtis Yarvin.
Sorry. I think that
Sorry,
Curtis
Simone, hold on. I'll add. So this morning, Simone and I were doing what we call a list of live players. These are people we need to follow up with and know. So our list, because basically they're active.
This is cribbing from Sam Oberja's concept of live players, which is someone who is thinking independently and likely to change the trajectory of humanity, because they're not going to act in the way that any other optimal thinker would when placed in some kind of wind-up toy position.
Exactly. But the point I'm making, Simone, is that we made this list this morning. So this is like a list of basically Ubermenschs, you could say.
Yeah. So on that list are people like Ayla, like Curtis Yarvin. These people definitely are thinking.
How long is the list?
It's like maybe 12 people.
It's like maybe 12 people. The list is, and I want to make absolutely clear here, not limited to the live players in our social networks. It's not live players we think we can build a connection with.
Yes, some of these people are people we've never had a conversation with. They don't know who we are.
Every live player on Earth today that we could identify. Simone, with the internet, how many more people do you think we know than Nietzsche knew within his lifetime?
Okay, touche.
He knew people who are maybe writing books within his lifetime, and then like people in his surrounding town. The number of people that we see, we are looking at cities of like millions and millions of people, and not like one city, but multiple cities. We are looking at like the smartest of the smart people in our society who get together to hold private events where, you know, we are picked for those events because like successful people think, oh, you guys are uniquely smart. And then we are leveraging those networks to find every other live player we can find. And there's just not that many. Like when you went to Hereticon, which is like some of the wealthiest people in the world, they go out and they find all of the greatest, most heretical thinkers of our time. And the most common complaint among the live players there was, it's just not that heretical here.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, we want more spicy conversations. But part of that and part of the discussion when people were saying that was, have we just become desensitized at this point?
No. So my point is, Simone, if you assume that the rate of live players within Nietzsche's lifetime is the same as the rate of live players within our lifetime, and Ubermensch means live player, is it really that weird that he wouldn't have met anyone that fit that qualification in his life?
Okay, you make a strong point. I'm probably I'm conflating his existence with the existence of that sort of Vienna cafe culture, turn of the century social club of people who are all very influential intellectuals.
But he
who kind of
wasn't
knew
in
each
that.
other. But he wasn't in that. And so that's my problem of just kind of mushing history all together and being like, I don't know, all smart dead people kind of hung out with each other.
So
Like
there were
happens today now.
communities of live players throughout history, but
Yeah.
Nietzsche was not in one of those communities. In
Yeah.
fact, his work was not recognized until after he died. So he'd have
Yeah.
no reason to think that he was uniquely brilliant or anything like that.
Yeah, okay, then totally understood. And thank you for giving me that explanation. And it's interesting that this concept comes up again in Samuel Berger's work and comes up again in what we're calling people to become in the Pragmatist Guide to Life. I didn't realize we were essentially asking people to become an
The
Ubermensch.
Pragmatist Guide to Becoming an Ubermensch. That is what the book basically is.
Yeah.
I really want to emphasize here how rare people are who create their own value system, even though Simone was like, but isn't that the basic that's expected of everyone? We have been in environments that are supposed to be the places where the best and the brightest of our society collate. You know, I have a Stanford MBA. She had the graduate degree from Cambridge. Whatever you think of higher institutions' utility, it is true that it can open some doors for you, and definitely of the people who are going into higher education, the Stanford Business School is probably the hardest program to get into, and Cambridge is one of the most classically prestigious graduate programs to get into. And at neither did I meet a single person I would put in this Ubermensch category. And I frequently, like, one of my go-to conversations is, okay, what do you want from your life? Like, well, it has value. What's good? And so few people had anything other than like an aesthetic explanation for that. Like, I want this aesthetic outcome, or I want this set of things that I was taught to expect from life, instead of having some like underlying logical explanation. Or you'd get pretty, childish life philosophies like, oh, things that make me feel good are good, and I should maximize feeling good among the population, which is, what you normally get from somebody who just hasn't put a lot of thought into life, I guess. And so, yeah, I think that I would commend to people that if you're out there and if you're young and you're like, okay, when am I going to finally meet the intellectually active people? I might give up on that, or not give up on that, but understand that you're going to meet them by doing the types of things that you as an intellectually active person would decide to do. So, like, if I was at the Pronatalist Convention, which is coming up soon, by the way, you can check it out, and the code word to get a discount is Collins. You're probably going to meet a lot of people like that there. Just because if you're looking at the world's problems today and you're not concerned about what other people think of you, you're probably going to be like, oh, fertility rates, that's an issue. Well, I should probably be working on that in some way. Or, some stuff around AI, you might see them in higher numbers. So like with the cafes of old, as Simone was talking about, it is the places where the best and the brightest coalesce to talk about the problems of the time, and not the accrediting institutions where you're going to find live players.
But I'm glad that I don't know, I kind of have insistently tried not to read Nietzsche because I don't want to be one of those people who is constantly influenced by, I personally, and this is another thing about our more backwoods influenced culture, is that we look down upon people who speak in the terms of other philosophers and constantly refer to them.
Oh, I hate it. As soon as somebody starts quoting philosophers to me, I'm like, oh, so you're an idiot.
Yeah, like just state things in simple terms and stop trying to front and show me how well read you are. This really bothers me.
Well, and I think that Nietzsche does a good job of this. He's also very against like cruelty of the strong to the weak. People think that's what he's like. No, he viewed that as a form of weakness. That's like the adult who plays children in tennis to dunk on them.
Well, and I can probably dig up the study and find it for you if you ask me for it before you run this, but I can share with you the study that showed that people in like a technical academic field who were lower in status tended to use more jargon than people who are higher in status, because it's a way for, if you actually are low status, to try to puff yourself up if you're of high status, all you want to do is explain things in dumbed down terms that people can understand. So honestly,
wanna
the
convey as
more
much
dumbed down
information
your
as possible.
terminology is, the higher status you are. And you know, someone who's really amazing at that is Elon Musk. When he explains things, he uses extremely simple terms. He doesn't make references. He speaks in words that everyone can understand, including children. And I think that's
Oh, I
great.
absolutely agree. You know who else is good at that is Trump. Never, you know, uses these like obscure references or anything like that. Like he's interested in getting his point across. Now, let's talk about Nietzsche's view of weakness, because a lot of people are going to see it as correlatory to our view of weakness when they are distinct. But I'm going to say that his view of weakness is not stupid. So a lot of people would say that he argues that weakness leads to immorality. So he calls this the slave morality. Okay.
Ooh.
So
oh no, is this his term for sheeple or something? Is this just
maybe a little bit? Okay, so he argues that there's this thing called slave morality in which the weak are unable to assert themselves psychologically or socially. They are developed.
This is his word for lemmings or sheeple or NPCs.
It's a bit different. It's a bit different than that.
Oh, okay.
They develop resentment towards the strong. They create a moral system that redefines weakness as virtuous. Traits like humility, meekness, and obedience become quote unquote good. Strengths, pride, and self-assertion become quote unquote evil. So essentially what he believes is that when individuals are weak, they redefine the rules of the game to make weakness strengths and to look down upon and see with contempt the things that some individuals have, which give them strengths over a weak individual. So if I'm a weak individual and I see somebody who has achieved things I can't because of their willpower or because of their cunning, I will redefine willpower or cunning as evil.
That's so interesting because I thought that this behavior was a very modern phenomenon. I thought, quite frankly, that those disempowered enough to see themselves in these weak positions have only just recently been given the platform and ability to shape culture. What he's implying with this definition, if you have it right, is that the weak for a very long time have had cultural influence and the ability to reshape narratives and have been trying to do this since at least his lifetime, which is surprising.
Yes, actually, he saw the beginning of this influence coming from Christian morality.
Oh yeah, which I mean, of course, like ever since the New Testament, ever since Jesus, this was the thing. You know, the meek shall inherit the earth, right? But
yes, and I think that this is an over, extrapolation of that line within Christianity. I do not believe that this is. I think if you look at something like turn the other cheek and that stuff, that is not weakness.
It's about being tough, and it's about being oriented around your values rather than your
values over other people's values. It's
and
about
your
not
ego.
listening, not responding, not.
Yeah.
If somebody is attacking you, you do not need to be baited into that.
Yeah.
And I'd also say the same with the meekness. This is about social inversion. It is not about weakness. Jesus didn't say the weak will inherit the earth.
Yeah, it says the meek.
Well, I'll look up the definition of the word as Jesus meant it in the context, because I think it's likely not.
Oh yeah, what the original word was. Yeah, everything's lost in translation.
The meek! Blessed are the meek! Oh, that's nice, isn't it? I'm glad they're getting something because they have a hell of a time.
Are you kidding me? Okay, so I go up to look. What does the word that is translated into English as meek, where Jesus says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth? I was like, okay, cool. Well, what's it mean? It means having self-control. The term is most frequently used to describe a horse that is tamed. What? It means you are a being of great strengths, but you act with gentleness, humility, and self-control. Of course, no one would want us to know what is being said. There are, blessed are those with self-control, for they will inherit the earth, the one thing we're not allowed to have. I would note that when I had mentioned this before in videos that were actually filmed after this video and edited after this video, so I'm editing this sort of in post, somebody was like, oh, well, if you look at this argument, meek actually is better translated as gentle. However, if you actually look at the instances in the argument that this person is providing, it's very clearly self-control fits better than the word gentle. So I'll give you some examples here. This is from the Nicomachean Ethics from Aristotle, where he's using this word, and we can try putting in the word self-control, and we can try then putting in the word gentle, and you'll see that self-control just fits better. It's pretty clear that this word meant self-control. All right, now we praise a man who feels anger on the right grounds and against the right persons, and also in the right manner and at the right moment for the right length of time. He may then be called self-controlled if we take having self-control to be a praiseworthy quality. For those with self-control really denote a calm temper, not led by emotion, but only by becoming angry in such a manner, for such causes and for such lengths of time as principle may ordain, although the quality is through rather to err on the side of defect, since the man with self-control is not prompted to seek redress for injuries, but rather inclined to forgive them. Now, let's put gentle in here, and you'll see that gentle just makes so much less sense. Now we praise the man who feels anger on the right grounds and against the right person, and also in the right manner, at the right moment, and for the right length of time. He may then be called gentle-tempered if we take gentleness to be a praiseworthy quality, for gentle really denotes a calm temper, not led by emotion. Is that what gentle it indicates? A calm temper not led by emotion, but only becoming angry for such cases that have like where principle may ordain? No, that's not what a gentle person would do. A person with self-control would only become angry when their principle would tell them to become angry, and not in reaction to things. A person with self-control would be a person who's able to restrain their temper. And I should note what's really cool here is we have Aristotle here basically in long form defining what this word actually meant, which is so cool that we get that. But it means more than just a generic self-control. It means very specifically the ability to control the emotions that you are expressing to other people or experiencing yourself in the face of something that might anger someone or something that might otherwise cause distress to an individual. So it's very specifically self-control over your emotional state, or at least the emotional state that you're expressing to other individuals. And it makes perfect sense to me that people with self-control and self-discipline would inherit the earth. Yeah, of course.
How blessed are the sorrowful, they shall find consolation. How blessed are those of gentle spirit, they shall have the earth for their possession. How blessed are those who hunger and thirst to see right prevail.
What was that? I don't know. I was too busy talking to Big Nose.
I think it was blessed are the cheesemakers.
Special about the cheesemakers.
Well, obviously, it's not meant to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturers of dairy products.
You hear that? Blessed are the Greek. The Greek. Well, apparently, he's going to inherit the earth. Did anyone catch his name?
The Meek. Blessed are the Meek. Oh, that's nice in it. I'm glad they're getting something because they have a hell of a time.
People used parts of Christian theology as early as Nietzsche's time and weaponized them. However, I would disagree with Nietzsche in the way that this plays out. So in Nietzsche's mind, specific individuals see other individuals becoming strong or successful, and then to psychologically protect themselves, they say, oh, the things that make them strong and successful are the things that are bad about them. I actually don't think it plays out that way. I think it happens at the level of cultural systems, as I've mentioned before, i.e. you will have one cultural system, as we've noted in the United States, that originally, for example, said, oh, if something creates disgust within you, then it is immoral, whether that is, you know, a diseased person or two men kissing or, you know, the poor, right? And then that began to create a lot of negative externalities. And then another cultural group was like, oh, we shouldn't be looking at things that way. Clearly this leads to, you know, this is the Mother Teresa thing, you know, hug the lepers, even if they create an evolved sense of disgust in you, because, you know, in an evolutionary context, if you hug people who have leprosy, you get leprosy and die, right? Like there's a biological reason to not hug somebody who looks horrifyingly sick. She was like, no, you need to overcome that. You need to learn to love them. And this appears on its surface to be a superior moral ideology. And I agree that it is in so far as it differentiates between the intrinsic disgust reaction. But even to Nietzsche, that intrinsic disgust reaction is something you need to learn to master. What the mistake that this cultural group makes is it begins to elevate the disgust reaction. It begins to say the things that create disgust are the things that are good at a cultural level. And I think you see this in a lot of modern art. I think you see
and the uglification of so many things.
Yes, where they will take video game characters and they'll say, if this character is rousing to look at or beautiful to look at, then it must be evil and we must subvert it. Whereas we need to
Yeah,
create.
or they will literally use attractive people as like, that's how you know they're fascists.
Mhm. Absolutely. And he thinks more broadly that what a lot of people consider virtue or morality is just a system for affirming weakness. And he focused a lot on this concept of being life denying or life affirming as a value system, which again, I guess I'd say rhymes a lot with a lot of like manosphere philosophies, or even our philosophy. If you look at our video of life levels of, or I think it might be the video on the age of vitality or vitalism, of vitalist-based systems. Now here, I'll note that you might now say, well, if all of this is the case, then how does Nietzsche define good, right? Like, if he's saying that weakness causes people to act in negative ways, how is he like measuring these individual actions as negative? And I'll read a basic explanation of how he defines what's good and what's bad. And this might surprise you as well, Simone. So Nietzsche defines quote unquote good primarily in terms of what promotes human flourishing and the realization of human greatness, particularly for those he considers quote unquote higher types or quote unquote noble. He rejects traditional morality's universal prescriptions in favor of a more individualistic and life affirming approach. Power and strengths. Nietzsche associates goodness with everything that heightens the feeling of power in man, the will to power and power itself. Life affirmation. He values actions and attitudes that affirm life, embrace struggle, and promote vitality rather than those that deny or diminish life. Human excellence. Nietzsche prioritizes the cultivation of exceptional individuals and their unique virtues over universal moral norms. Creativity and self-overcoming. He emphasizes the importance of creating new values and constantly striving to surpass oneself. Metrics for evaluation. Life promotion. Nietzsche asks whether moral decisions are quote unquote life promoting, life preserving, species preserving, perhaps even species cultivating. Now you can see how much this aligns with a lot of our philosophy. Flourishing of higher types. He judges moral systems by their capacity to facilitate the development of exceptional individuals. Perspectivism. Nietzsche advocates for recognizing the validity of different moral perspectives within their cultural context rather than adhering to universal standards. So again, pluralism. Nietzsche argued for pluralism.
Yeah, this is so unexpectedly pro-natalist, optimistic, and vitalistic when I'm used to being presented Nietzsche as this very depressing, dark, black-pilled guy.
Well,
Weird.
and I think that what we're seeing here is why, like, and then finally here, overcoming resentment. He values moral systems that avoid the resentment and reactive attitudes he associates with slave morality. By rejecting traditional morality's universal claims, focus on altruism, Nietzsche aims to create a space that is more nuanced, individualistic, and life-affirming in its approach to ethics that promotes human greatness and cultural flourishing. So you can see from this, a lot of this aligns with our value system. Not all of it, and we're going to get into just a second why not all of it does. But when you hear this, I bet you're thinking, this is not the Nietzsche I was told existed. Why wasn't I told that this is what Nietzsche was actually about?
Nietzsche.
Whatever. I don't care what his real name is. It's a different, it's not a real language. There's English and then there's everything else. I don't want to sully my words by drinking sewer water, okay? And again, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about cultural competition. Having a degree of humor in your cultural pride, humor in your patriotism can be great in terms of causing other people to lean into their cultural pride and patriotism.
Yes.
But I think that the urban monoculture fundamentally hid from people what this philosophy was because they knew it was.
It would seem so.
He basically called out wokeism before wokeism came to exist.
Yeah, this is pretty mind-blowing for me. Thank you for cooling me on this.
Well, I mean, I think that he's like, oh yeah, so in the future, this group of people is going to use sympathy as a weapon. They're going to use it they're going to begin to have contempt for everyone who's successful, everyone who's thriving. They're going to try to spread this morality. They're going to try to diminish these people's capacity for exceptionalism. He could be seen as a very, like, it's interesting. If you go over what Nietzsche thought, it is very, I'd say, predictive and almost prophetic of woke culture and the evils of woke culture and how woke culture acts and hurts people. The evils of the culture that creates basically roaming populations of homeless people who just get shipped between cities as soon as any city receives sanity. And then another city is like, oh, we'll be the good guys now. And it is fundamentally evil. And it is something that fundamentally we must fight against, but fortunately it is also self-extinguishing. The slave morality that Nietzsche talks about, I think, spiraled out of control within recent ages and is now the dominant cultural group in our society, not in the way it was during the Christian period, but in an even more true way. Where in the Christian period, I think people were twisting scripture to get slave morality, where now I think slave morality is being worshipped in and of itself. Any thoughts before I go into how we differentiate from Nietzsche, Simone?
No, I mean, you just basically summed it up, but that's still fascinating.
As to how we differentiate from Nietzsche, which I think is very interesting. From our perspective, which could be seen as very aligned with Nietzsche,
yeah,
we deride people like Nazis for the same reason we deride the BLM movement, which is to say Nazis say we are not thriving, we didn't win the war because of this other cultural group that's making more money than us, it's doing better academically than us, it's in higher paid professions than us, the Jews. A lot of people think they didn't like the Jews because they thought the Jews were like dirty or something. They use that in some of their advertisements, but that was in the same way wokes will call like white people disgusting. Most of the stuff on the Jews that the Nazi complained that they out-earned Germans, that they were taking money from Germans, that they had quote unquote privilege over Germans, if you translated it to modern words. There's a reason you're not being told this, but that was fundamentally the way the ideology worked. And that was why I deride that ideology so much. But for the same reason that was like BLM, where they're like, oh, black culture isn't doing well because white culture is cheating. White culture is victimizing us. And I'm like, it's not. And they're like, no, look at all these systemic. And I'm like, well, look, everything was taken from us when we were slaves. And I was like, well, everything was taken from the Japanese much more recently when they were put in the concentration camps. And they bounced back pretty well. I have a lot of Jewish friends.
Internment camps, but yeah.
Internment, whatever. A lot of friends of mine, families went through the Holocaust and they lost everything and the Nazis took everything from them and they moved to the US and now they're all rich again. Explain that. You know, it's cultural differences. When you can accept that you need to learn from other cultures, you can improve quickly. When you believe in a past, and this is, I think, a danger for Black culture right now that it's facing, is the Wakandanization of ancient Africanism, which is to say that they can just go back to some ancient way of being African and they'll be able to outcompete everyone instead of needing to come to
Wakanda's not ancient, it's super high tech. That's what makes it so cool.
No, but it is based on the belief, which has become quite common within some Black communities, that they used to be this super powerful advanced civilization, and that by going back to that, they can achieve greatness again. And I look at the We Was Kings movements the same way that I look at modern anti-Semites or Nazis more broadly. It is a glorification of a past that never happened.
Right, because our key philosophy is you don't go back, you push forward, taking what was best.
Well, no, our biggest key philosophy is the biggest deception you could ever have is a deception against yourself. A belief that you are strong where you are weak, that you are succeeding where you are failing. But how are we different from Nietzsche? The core failure of Nietzsche's philosophy, and this isn't that big a failure, but it is a core differentiation we have, is he saw individuals as being made up of like sort of competing urges or components that fought against each other. And while I think this exists to an extent, I think that the core unit of identity when we're looking at society is not the individual, but it's the intergenerational family unit, and then the clan, and then the individual. If I'm sort of ranking the importance of these individual things. And when I'm looking at the individual, above the individual is me in this exact moment of time, or me as I exist as a combination of my genetics and the memeplexes, which are living on top of those genetics. But me as an individual is just not particularly important. And I think a lot of our philosophy could be seen as, now I'd never read Nietzsche before, so I didn't know that any of these were ideas that rhymed with his ideas, of taking some ideas that rhyme with his ideas and applying them at the cultural level instead of applying them at the individual level.
I mean, Wouldn't you say that there are some competing urges within every human, with at least every human who tries to rise above their base humanity? Like, there's the part of you that just wants to eat and be lazy and lie back and not work because we're designed to conserve energy and maximize intake of calories and reproduce. But then there's also our prefrontal cortex and this ability to rise above and reason and engage with logic and think about things bigger than just our basic urges. I think that's a fundamental internal struggle that anyone who even sees themselves as part of a larger chain has to overcome every single day, don't you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we often talk about it as a four-footed beast which is caged with us. You have your human side and your animal side, and they're both in a cage, and you need to feed your animal side just enough meat to keep it from getting strong, or it will attack and kill you. It will dominate you. But if you feed it nothing, it goes rabid and attacks you. Or you end up spending all your time mollifying it and petting it and being like, it's okay, buddy. I know, we haven't seen porn in a year, but you don't need to freak out when you see an attractive woman.
Colonel, these men have taken a supreme vow of celibacy, like their fathers and their fathers before them. Haven't seen a woman in decades.
Miss Huddleston. You say your war is over. Wherever you go, you take the pain with you. I know you were hurt when that woman left, but you're just using that to hide from who you really are.
Thank you. Next.
But yeah, I think that we see that, but I take that not from Nietzsche. I take that from Winwood Reade, where he talks about these concepts. And I think that also our concept of civilization, which is to say civilization or a civilized individual is someone who's better able to suppress these pre-evolved needs and ideas for and humanity more broadly, where you argued to me, and I have adopted this view, is that the human is the part of ourselves that we choose instead of the part of ourselves that we are born with. And that people who are more human are the people who are better able to suppress their pre-born instincts, their animal side. Would you agree with that?
Sorry, I'm trying to find like moments when I can talk when she's not whinging. I have a call in 6 minutes, just as a note.
Great. Well, then we used our time wisely today. And I really appreciate you, Simone. It's so cool to be potentially contributing to the philosophical canon of human civilization, but be able to do so was not living a shitty life like Nietzsche did.
The amount of luxury that we enjoy is humbling every single day. I mean, I'm just humbled that we have hot water. It is amazing. Running water, and hot water. Holy crap. And drink a potable water, that we can just drink the water that we get in our faucets. There are so many things that blow my mind every single day. And yeah, that we get to it. Also that the average person in a developed country now who has access to an internet connection and a phone can engage with the world's leading philosophers. I mean, this used to be something where only the wealthiest and the most connected would have the shot at going to some university where some major philosopher was pontificating in some large venue, and you wouldn't really necessarily get to know them or have a lot of exposure to their ideas. And now people can just go on YouTube and listen to it, or like follow this person on Substack. And I love that we live in this age, and I love how democratized these great ideas are. And to your point, now I'm coming away from this conversation very grateful for the fact that while Nietzsche lived at a time where he thought that the Ubermensch was like a theoretical figure, that now pretty much everyone has the tools to become an Ubermensch, and that there are a decent number of these people, and that they are significantly changing the trajectory of humanity at a time where we would argue this is one of those inflection points in the entire history of humankind and intelligence in general that is really crucial. And some decisions made by a small handful of people who choose to participate in the game. And this is not about who has the most money or the most IQ or the highest IQ, that is. It is about those who choose to show up and play this game. They're going to change the course of human history and intelligence.
The interesting thing is to tell Nietzsche that we would eventually enter a time of such opulence, of such abundance, that because pleasure was so everywhere for people, that the only humans who are able to survive, the only humans who are able to make it through this crucible, are the ones who trended towards the Ubermensch. That is fundamentally what our philosophy of the Garden of the Lotus Eaters is.
Yeah.
It's to say that only those who can master their own values and master themselves are going to exist in the future. We are at a civilizational bottleneck where only the Ubermensch survive.
Yeah. It's exciting. It's exciting. It's scary, but it gives me a lot of hope. And I love the fact that so many people have a shot at really mattering now. And it doesn't come down to where you went to school or who you know or how wealthy you are, whatever, like that was in the past. And I mean, I think Nietzsche did come from a position of having enough money in his family and having enough family to support to a certain extent to be someone who had these ideas. Now this is something that's a lot more democratized. So it's cool. Thank you. This is a really interesting conversation. I didn't think it would be, because we've talked about this so much and we're like, I don't know, this seems like a straightforward situation, but there's more to it.
There is. And I was surprised because I had always sort of looked down on Nietzsche's work as being like try hard. I sort of thought of it as like,
well, maybe it's because so many try hard people started talking about it and then you start to associate it with that. And I think here's the problem. Here's what may have completely broken his reputation, is that a bunch of like incel red pillar types started quoting his work way too much, not way too much, but like a lot. And then all of those, the urban monoculture enemies of those people then basically started blackballing Nietzsche as a historical figure because he was this superhero to a particular class of human that they saw as subhuman and hateable, and anything that they liked or respected had to be bad.
Concept aesthetically aligns with some Nazi ideals when people hear it because they don't know what it means. They don't know it means people who.
Well, yeah, it's a German word and it implies some level of superiority. It must be evil.
Yeah, and he was around during the Nazis, and I've heard that some of his books were edited by somebody who had Nazi sympathies after he died because he sort of became famous after he died.
Was he pre-Nazi? I don't know the exact timeline.
My understanding is he was sort of when the Nazis were rising, and his like sister or cousin or something edited a lot of his works to include some like anti-Semitic ideals. When I think that, you know, realistically, if you're applying his ideals, it'd be incredibly pro-Jewish because, which is, but I think that if you look at our ideals, I guess I'd say that our ideals are significantly closer to the ideals of somebody like Nietzsche than they are to your classic modern anti-Semite or racist or anything like that, but they don't align completely with them.
Yeah. Well, which is fair because we live with a lot of additional information. And
what am I having for dinner tonight before your call, by the way?
So I'm kind of experimenting a little bit with something from the freezer, and if it doesn't work out, I'm going to have backup.
What are you experimenting with? Spit it out.
Your Karai spiced chicken. I'm going to try baking and air frying different versions of it, maybe with an egg wash to see if we can revive it, because you don't want to deep fry it anymore. You're concerned about the carcinogenic elements of the oil. So I'm going to try 2 different elements of baking it simultaneously tonight. And if neither of them ends up working out, then you're going to have grilled cheese sandwiches.
Where's the Karai spiced chicken?
It was in the deep freezer and we need to use it or get rid of it. So.
Oh, is it like meant for deep frying?
Yeah, you had pre-prepared this for deep frying. You'd created Karai spice.
Deep fry it in a pan.
I don't want to deal with all the oil.
Okay, well, we'll see how it works.
Yeah, and if this doesn't work and you still think that it's worth reviving, there's a lot more of it. There's a ton of it because you made a huge
I will deep fry it then because I like that deep fried Karai
Okay,
chicken.
then next time I will fill a large pan.
All right, do your call. You're late.
Thanks, bye. So
I really appreciate that, Simone. You did a great job.
I hit order on Amazon. I am skilled.
You acted with efficiency and urgency, which is what was required of you for this particular emergency, Simone.
Make sure you're centered. No. Just no. What? There. No, not quite. There you go. Thank you. These things.
We're trying to think of how we can start this.
Well, so you mentioned the Star Trek clip. You have the clip from that anime.
What Star Trek? Oh, the Star Trek. Yes.
I mean, there's so many this is one of those, I think it keeps recurring in memes as a trolley problem and in media and in shows, because it's one of these problems that we're fully aware of and we just don't like it. But also social mores, like tribal based, intuitive evolutionary traits that we have, like that intuition toward fairness, means that we can't override logic without feeling an extreme pull. Like, it's deeply unfair that this exists, and we're evolved to not accept the reality. But at the same time, we logically know that that is the reality. And I think that that tension makes this something that people keep bringing up and highlighting without ever, of course, coming to a clear conclusion. Unlike us, of course, we just know exactly what.
Okay, Simone, I'll get started so we can jump right into
Go
this.
for it, yeah.
It's Daddy the Bone Collector! Ah! You're not gonna get me! Bam! Bam! I got it! I'm gonna escape! No! Toasty! Octavian's got me and he's gonna eat me! Oh, that looks like it hurt a lot, buddy. Are you okay? Are you okay? Did you see what happened?
What happened?
Oh, he hit my knee with his chin.
Oh, God.
And he hit his tongue, I think.
Aw, Toast, you want a hug?
Hey, move. Torsten got hurt. He tripped.
Torsten, come here and get a hug, buddy. Come here, buddy. Come here.
Octavian's going through.
Come here, my love. I got you.